welcome common folk to the town commons. What's going on, Christian? How you doing?
I am great.
Sweet. All right, so today we're going to talk about American imperialism. Conquest, human conquest, is basically as old as the dawn of time. But before we dig into that topic, there's a really important topic that we have to briefly touch on first, and that is, Christian, are you familiar with the meme that's going around about a gorilla against 100 guys?
Yes.
What are your real quick? What are your thoughts on that?
All right. So there's a reason why this is a meme and has never actually been attempted. Men, right now, men with weapons, right? Very different, right? And that's the thing. So I have a little brother who's played collegiate football. He was 6'5", 310 pounds in shape.
Big guy.
Guy is terrified of big dogs. But he's like, but give me a baseball bat, and that fear just goes away.
Right.
And so part of our whole situation is utilizing tools or weapons or things like that. And you put us in a situation, where a gorilla, ultimately, if I had to have a strategy, if I was like one of the Christians and I was putting in the Coliseum to get killed by a gorilla with 100 other men, you'd want to wear them down.
Yes.
Samurais, right?
Right.
You would not want to. They're made to, be very powerful and quick over short distances for a little while, and when they're worn down and tired, exhausted, then see what you can do. But ultimately, it's
it's pretty fun. I mean, right? It's all the intimidation factor, right? Like, and of course, it depends on what 100 men you got in there, right? Like, if you got, like 100 burly Republicans, like, then you can manage. But if you got like
men who have done a day's work, who have had blisters on their hands,
like 100 female hippie Democrats, probably not going to take a gorilla out, like, right? You know what I mean? But there it is. So
we're allowed to create weapons. I mean, you've seen the beginning of 2001: Space Odyssey,
right? Yeah. With
which is like these animal humanoid creatures, but one of them gains a little intelligence and just devises the crudest use to use a weapon, a lever, a machine, instead of his own strength, and immediately has an advantage. Right?
Of course.
And so that's all.
Speaking of using a weapon as an advantage, I got chased out of a park by a goose today. Like, I almost had to.
They have goslings, right?
Yeah, I guess I didn't see him, but I think that's what happened. I think I accidentally walked in between him and his family, but I didn't see him. Like, I only saw the mother goose, I think. So, but I after every time I would turn around, he would charge at me, and then I'd turn around and he would back off for a second. Well, man, this is insane. I'm getting chased around by an 11-pound bird, But anyway.
Well, as soon I've noticed it too. As soon as it gets overcast, I was looking at these geese with some with their goslings, and you can see them. And I go to take a picture, but then a cloud became a little overcast. They disappeared. I sent the picture, and nobody's like, "What are you taking the picture of?" I'm like, "Zoom in. There's some goslings there, right?" The sort of breed just disappears in that, and so I get hissed at a little bit if I don't see them. But.
Of course.
The freeloading Canadians. And that's what we're talking about today.
And that's why we need them to become the 51st state. All right, well, let's get into this. So yes, American imperialism, right? Now, obviously mankind has taken over territory since the dawn of man. One of the things that I want to impress upon everybody in advance of this is some of this stuff that I'm going to talk about today is going to sound kind of gruesome, maybe, or the conquest is kind of a taboo subject. So it's nobody nowadays, right? People think that basically every nation's line that exists on Earth should remain exactly where it is for the rest of humanity, right? And it's just not very possible. It's just not probable that's going to take place.
We don't live like that now. People move around. I was born in Idaho, grew up in Southern California. went to school in Utah, lived in Kentucky for a while, and now here I am in North Carolina. Like people, there are certain kind of people that stay where they were born and live, but almost half people in our population, they don't live where they grew up, right? We're sort of a migratory type, and that's but maybe we should begin with the land acknowledgement.
Yeah, right. I honestly have no clue who owned the land here where I was, but anyway, so yeah, so like starting off with obviously the colonization of America, and then briefly like moving into the Trail of Tears, Manifest Destiny, the Spanish-American War, where we ended up acquiring Puerto Rico and Guam and like 18 other little spots. And I guess we even had Cuba for a while, but then we gave it up. So this is one thing that I noticed about America. One of the first things I'm going to say is that we seem to acquire territory and then like give it back a lot. And I'm not sure if that's like part of our like strategy, like to like make us seem like more benevolent or something like that. But
it depends. It depends on how we want to govern it. So like in North Carolina, historically, North Carolina extended from the Pacific Ocean to the Mississippi River.
Right.
But the government in North Carolina didn't want to govern over the mountains. So they cut off. They're like, this is where effectively we want to stop governing.
Right.
And that became just territory, and ultimately became Tennessee. And so a lot of it, obviously we see logistics and communications now is very easy to govern. But a lot of it, you think in the 1-800s or the 1800s or early 20th century, governing from a great distance was sometimes seemed like not in their best interest. And so, like Philippines were almost made a state.
Yeah.
Right. But it was seen like that far we couldn't really administer and give them the type of government that they needed.
Right. Well, like why isn't Puerto Rico a state, for example? Or all the like Guam is a U.S. territory. We have several territories that are all they're all ours. They still pay taxes to us. We still defend. And here's another thing, right? Like we defend all of the earth. America basically protects everyone, with the exception of like the people who like actively don't want it, like China, right? But like aside from that, we basically we protect all of Europe. We protect every shipping route in the universe. And yet these aren't our territories, right? They're not really beholden to us in any form other than we just kind of have this loose.
Well, they have to not tick us off. That's sort of like our standard is sort of like be excellent to each other, and just don't like try to shoot ourselves down. Just don't be huge jerks. And so we're sort of a benevolent superpower. There hasn't really been a superpower like us. We do sort of expect that our markets, that our vendors, people coming from America, will be able to profit from that social structure or trade structure apparatus created by those sort of naval policing, things like that. But for the most part, it's a greater good we just feel like should exist. Like there should not be piracy in the Western Hemisphere if we can prevent it.
Right. And obviously, like the West is synonymous with us, right? Like every time somebody says, Western civilization, the first thing they think of is America, maybe very closely followed by the UK and then the rest of Europe. But it's all America, right? Like we're it, like we are NATO, we are UN, we are basically everybody that we were involved with. It's America. And then all these other like side notes, right? These asterisks.
Yeah. If you start an organization and you want to be taken seriously, have America be on on the group. Then people will be like, oh, this is a real organization.
So discussing American imperialism, as I went through it, right, and we've done a lot of things in a lot of different places. And it seems like after the Civil War, basically, and especially since World War II, it's like we have kind of walked on eggshells, right? We still exert influence everywhere, but we don't do it as overtly as we used to, right? Like for example, in South America and Central America, we basically just used to, start coups or take over whatever nation we wanted to. And then, like as soon as there was a president that we were happy with, we were like, okay, we can take a step back for a minute and let commerce continue. And we still kind of do that, but we just do it very like, hush hush. It's like the CIA does it underneath the waters. And now President Trump is the first president in a long, long time that actually wants to expand our territory. Right? He's like the first person since, I don't know, basically since like the
Abe Lincoln.
Since the Spanish-American War, I guess, basically.
Well, let's see. Hawaii became a state in 1959.
Okay.
I mean, it had been a territory for a long time before that, but finally got statehood in 59. But yeah, as far as I guess Roosevelt was the last one to really
and even that, and Trump he's ambitious, right? He's not talking about like Hawaii. He's talking about Canada, Greenland, Panama Canal. Like he's like trying to take like Gaza Strip, like he's trying to take over the whole world. Now, obviously, he's not gonna do it by force. Probably, like almost certainly, like 99.99999%. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the media game, right? Because every time they ask him about that, they're like, will you rule out taking it over by force? And of course, he always answers like, no, I'm not going to take anything off the table, right? Because I'm the president, this is our government, you're the media. I'm not going to tell you what our strategy is, right? It's like it's game that they want to like try to like force his words upon himself. And it bothers me because, like that's the elitist game plan. It's like to try to trick people into like committing to something that to limit their options.
Right. If we want somebody to join the United States, right, and that would be ultimately the goal would be that they'd participate in government, they'd have full citizenship, they'd be able to have rights and voting. It's different from taking on lesser status or some sort of puppet state that we're going to extract resources out of and exploit. And it would have to be, we're not really interested in insurgencies or anything, so it'd be something that they would have to want. It's sort of opening up if somebody in the Western Hemisphere, we're not interested in Europe or Africa or Asia or anything, someone in the Northwestern Hemisphere decides democratically that they'd like to join the United States, we'll consider it. Like we're not just against it. Like, and he says that obviously with what we're doing already, Greenland and Canada would make a lot of sense for how we coordinate stuff, anyways. And since we believe in states' rights, at least the Republican Party does, federalism, you can still have your government can still do things the way you want to. Just you'd be subject to American constitutional protections.
Right.
But, sovereignty is also a pride thing in people's national identity. It's one of the big things like Puerto Rico, last time they voted for to become a state and it didn't work out, one of the things that they cared about was that they got to have their own soccer team or like this universe contestant, things like this, where it's really an identity thing, even though it doesn't, make sense, like as far as arguments go. These are reasons why they'd rather retain some sort of autonomy. They get to, still exist. Somewhat.
So Tanya's asking about Trump's statement. When Trump says that he doesn't want to rule out force, I promise you that. Keep in mind that he's answering the question too. He's not going out of his way to state, I'm not going to rule out force. Like he's not going to the press conference and making a statement, I'm not ruling out force. What's happening is they're trying to trick him into committing to an action or to a lack of action, right? They're trying to say, will you rule out force? And he's saying, no, I'm not going to rule out anything to you, right? You aren't the person that I'm beholden to. I'm beholden to the American people and my constituents and to my strategic advisors who are going to tell me what the right course of action is. He's not talking to like some Joe Schmo from MSNBC about
Yeah.
what his foreign policy is. And that's
Yeah.
the thing. I mean, whether or not he actually intends force is irrelevant. Yeah. I mean, he has said that. He's actually said specifically those words that why would I tell you that? He's literally said like, why, somebody asked him, is like, he's like, no, I'm not going to commit. Why would if I did anything like that, why would I do that to you? He's like, he's literally said those words on live camera. It's kind of funny actually to watch him shut people down like that. So let's talk about Canada being the 51st state, because it's kind of intriguing, right? Now, somebody asked me earlier if I was in favor of it. I'm kind of neutral, right? Like I don't think that we need Canada, right? Like there's nothing in Canada that I'm thinking, oh gosh, we have to have this. Now, I will say that strategically, Canada is close to the Arctic Circle, right? So it's kind of nice to have that, like, strategically, it's nice to have access to that, like, zone. It's nice to be able to, like, have slightly more time with missile defense systems if, for example, Russia or China were to fire over the top of the Arctic Circle. It's also, there's extra resources there. We in America, one of the good things about America's expansion, whether people like it or not, is we can tap resources like nobody else can, right? Like, so if a lot of these countries, these nations have all this like natural raw resources, and they just don't have the economic power to like just go in there and start like an industry. But we do. We could like turn that thing over like this, and then all of a sudden, all the rare earth elements, all the natural gases, like, boop, 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 boop. And Canada can't do that. Greenland can't do that. Like, nobody else can really do that. So those are like, what else are you thinking? Those are some of the
So
pluses.
when I think in Canada, like you've got to really think of it in three sort of regions, right? A lot like the America, the East Coast, which is on the Atlantic seaboard,
East Coast
ports, the manufacturing parts of Toronto and Montreal, and then part of South Ontario, sort of close to Detroit, New York, and Ohio, and then this vast plains area, right? Just like the American plains, from about middle of Kansas to Nevada, where there's really only a couple of cities, not a lot of people,
right?
Sparsely populated, and then you have British Columbia on the ocean. Really, even just really, it's just coastal British Columbia that's really has any type of population. So it's a huge area, but the population's down. It would involve governing really like those three areas that we care about, and sort of very little to do with that. So I thought it would make sense if Canada came in to break it up into at least 3 states, potentially 4, right?
Yeah.
Have like New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland be 1 state. Have Quebec be a state, or Quebec, Ontario be a state. Have the Plains, right? Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta be a state, and have British Columbia be a state. And then just have the Yukon and Northwest Territories be their kind of still be territories, because they're so few
it's
people.
like something like 90% of their population is like within 100 miles of America anyway, or something like that. Like, because of course it's cold as hell. This is why. Well, another reason why I don't know why we would want Canada. It's like who's gonna go up there, to visit other than like that zone that's right by America anyway. It's like, it's like, oh, I'm visiting the ice lake of. I thought about it. It made me think about Game of Thrones. It's like, the wall of ice.
Yes.
It's like we've got this wall of ice up there. It's like the moment you take that wall of ice down, like all the wildlings are just going to come south, and like we're
yeah. They want to live in the land of always winter.
Right. Now, what I'll say, Canada, their plurality in their Overton window is very left leaning compared to America. Now, one thing that worries me as a conservative is I don't want to like introduce 3 states that are all Democrat, like all practically socialist. Right.
Well,
and I don't want to introduce like, and furthermore, like, it's funny that like they're going to be against us, right? They're not going to like our freedoms, because our freedoms mean things like, They're not going to have universal health care. They're not going to have, because those things infringe upon our freedoms, and they don't understand that.
But their states can implement that if the states want that, right? Massachusetts can, do that type of thing, and so that's why we have federalism. The federal government doesn't need to create free health care. If the states want to do that, they can do that, right? And so there's nobody stopping that. The one thing America has is we have really good credit. We have always paid our bills, and our money is a lot stronger. Canada and other countries don't have quite the record of the commitment to that, and so it's one thing that's held them back. And yeah, just access to markets, right? Our river system effectively makes Minneapolis and Pittsburgh seagoing ports, right? Which is something very powerful and could leverage, make Canada. But I think ultimately it's the proximity. Our cultures are very similar. There aren't clear reasons why we shouldn't. And Trump is trying to sort of, maybe it's very progressive. Hey, just think about this. There's, other than pride, there's not a reason why, break down our systems of government are similar enough that you can come in. We can still allow you to keep your Canada-ness as part of your statehood.
Right.
But then we just work together. And yeah, there would be resistance for a little while, but I think ultimately there'd be integration in a generation or so, maybe 2 generations. I definitely think if you allowed Panama to vote, or like Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Belize, San Salvador, maybe, if there was like a Central American state, like that would greatly improve their lives. Greatly. Definitely. Right? And because the thing that's always held them back is a government corruption, right? And corrupt leaders. They might have a period of time where they have a good leader, but then that guy dies, and then it's just like corruption with no end in sight. Right.
And a little bit of our influence, right? Like we definitely haven't helped sometimes. We've definitely destabilized the region.
Yeah. But because the leaders weren't very good, they were easy to destabilize, and they were corrupt. So like part of the reason like Cuba fell to the communists is the Cuban leadership was corrupt.
Right.
But if you could just give good government, right, non-corrupt, the countries that sort of solve corruption. Like Costa Rica, all of a sudden just start blossoming, right? And that's one thing. San Salvador, they've tried to like stop corruption, stop crime and gangs, and they're starting to prosper. People are like, hey, you can live here and things like that. So bringing American prosperity by having effectively less corruption. I'm not saying American government is perfect, but we really try, and is less corrupt than a lot of these other governments have been.
Right. So I wanted to address one thing that somebody said in the comments here. Ida mentioned that U.S. is 25th on the Freedom Index. That's that's maybe one of like, I think 8 or 10 different publications that manage this Freedom Index, but most of them put us somewhere between 15th and 20th, right? But one point that I've always made is that those indexes are based around a lot of different things that have nothing to do with freedom, right? So like a lot of it, for example,
true liberty and freedom is different.
Right. Like a lot of it, for example, has to do with like average income and stuff like that. Like if you're, for example, if you live in like, Switzerland or something, or Denmark or something, you've got this like perfectly homogenous group of people that all live in elevation that have like this great, then it's like, and they all make somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 a year. Well, that's great, right? But there are only like 5 million people in that whole nation. So it sounds really good, but like that's like Rhode Island to us, that's like it's not apples to apples comparison. And they don't have freedom of speech like we do. They can't if they say some of the things that we say that have no problem here, like other than, a social problem, someone can, be mad at you. But other than that, like they'll get fined, they'll get arrested. They don't have the right to bear arms like we do. They don't have I can go down the list. There's a lot of freedoms that we have that a lot of the European nations that rate higher than us on the Freedom Index do not have. and some that they have that we don't have too, right? It's always give and take, but
well, yeah. What they have is what's called good government, where they have for small populations, they have a very active government to provide programs for their people and to redistribute wealth, and they have a small enough population to manage that. We have chosen democratically over and over again that we don't want that in America, right? That's not how we want to live, and that good government ultimately collapses. It's like Rome and other things. When the government's job is to feed the people or to provide all these things, those are the things that when it collapses. We want to create a social structure where people can on their own provide for themselves and succeed, where they don't have to be corrupt, right?
Preach.
They don't have to be criminals. So that's what the federal government has to do here. And when you have a large population, that's the only thing that makes sense. And so that's the type of freedom that America really wants. We don't want freedom as defined by Denmark or Switzerland, though Bernie Sanders or other small states, Vermont, would love to create that in their small population.
Right. Yeah. So Charlie Hilton says, does restricting those freedoms lead to greater freedoms? This is the classic game, right? It's like if you ever read, something like Animal Farm or something, it's like, they'll explain how good it is for you that they have complete control over your life, right? And like, yes, it is true that you get some advantages from that kind of structure, from that regimentation. There always will be, right? And then especially if it's a situation where they like try to mandate equality across the board, it almost never works. But
here's an analogy I'd like those watching to think about: an animal in captivity. Think about a cheetah in captivity, right? Sitting in the zoo in Washington D.C. or here in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is nice habitat. Might be 4 or 5 acres down here in North Carolina. They can wander around. Might be a whole acre at the D.C. zoo. Now that cheetahs in the wild live about half as long as cheetahs in captivity live, right?
Yep.
Right. So, but the cheetahs in captivity, right? They got the same little circle to run around. They get their food fed to them. They don't get to really hunt, right?
Right.
And Aesop is one of old Aesop's fable: better to be hungry and free than to be well fed and a slave, right? And so when people go to zoos, we see that, but we understand that this is not this animal really would, usually there's some reason why it couldn't survive in the wild or something like that. Right. They should be out there. We understand that implicitly that we'd rather have lower quality of life but be free rather than be well fed and be a slave.
Exactly. Yeah. Like the common one I use is like, people often refer to like gun deaths in America. And I'm like, well, what about cars? Cost almost exactly the same number of lives every year. Do you want to take away cars? Right. The right to have in America has just been consistently better for us than the freedom from any penalties from that thing. Right. Like it's always better to have the option than to, within reason, obviously, like we have seat belts in cars and stuff like that. We're not completely like anyway. But so with regard to Canada, I think as long as we maintain that concept, right? The concept of like small centralized government, but the local governments can manage the way they want, and they can keep managing the way that they are now, right? Like nothing would really have to change in Canada other than like the broad overhauling rules would essentially, but they could just manage for that. Like any rule that they want to keep from Canada that like isn't in the American government proper, as long as it doesn't violate one of our rights, they can implement it. They can be essentially one of the great things about small central government and decentralized government is you can do any kind of government you want in the local sector that you're in. Any kind you want. Now, if you flip it, like if you make it a strong central government and you make it communist or socialist at the top, I can't have like a laissez-faire economy in this small section of where I am. It doesn't work the other way around. It only works if there's small central government and But it is what it is. So
yeah, this is my
Canada.
long philosophy. If there's a place for liberal or progressive or leftist market manipulation, it's on the very local level. If socialism's work, it's on the smallest population possible, like a community, maybe a neighborhood or something, and people have to agree freely that they want to participate in that.
Right. So Cartel says, you get resources and poison their land. I'd like to think that America is a relatively good steward of the climate. I think that we have some of the most rigid like protections with the EPA and with the OSHA and everything like that. Like it's amazing to me often that we outsource a lot of the things that we do better than everyone else, right? In America, I don't think that if we got Canada that we just start like hacking their forests down and like destroying their mountains and kill. No, that's not it wouldn't help us, right? Like it just wouldn't do any good. So we would definitely try our best not to poison the land. We would do our best, obviously.
Well, right. So the other argument has been like as soon as they became part of the United States, all these Americans would immediately move to Quebec to have the free health care.
Right.
Yeah, but how many Canadians are going to move south to have spring in March?
Right. Right. I've actually,
And,
funny. We were just talking to somebody in my other chat, and he's like, the moment if Canada ever becomes a 51st state, I'm going south like immediately. It's like I'm like, well, you could just do that now. You don't have to wait.
yeah.
We don't have any problems with taking in Canadians. Says, all right. Anyway, let's take a look at Greenland. Right.
Sure.
So Greenland, similar scenario. The strategic value is it's right on that Arctic Circle, right? So it gives us some military advantage. I think that's actually going to start becoming a big shipping route for like Russia and China, stuff like that. So it is helpful to have kind of command of that zone. Now, I don't think that they want. Here's the thing: none of these places really like want to be American. They all have this kind of like semi anti-American sentiment. I think the last poll in was it Greenland or Denmark or something was something like 11% wanted to come over. But I'm like, that could change over time when they realize that we can turn what is essentially just a flat sheet of ice into a paradise. Who knows?
Well,
I mean,
they could be sustainable. They could have jobs right now. The 84,000 people that permanently live in Greenland have to be subsidized. They're basically on welfare from Denmark. And
right.
Trump says by becoming part of the U.S., not only could you freely immigrate, but we can make it so the people living there could be self-sufficient, not just have to essentially be living on food stamps and government assistance to get by. So that type of prosperity. Now and Greenland is part of North America, so it is. It's one of those things where it feels like they shouldn't be aligned with Europe, especially right that. But they're the Western Hemisphere, right? Northwestern Hemisphere. So.
Yeah, it's like right on that line, right? Right. I don't know. I mean, yeah. Again, Greenland's another one of those places like where it's like Trump seems to want it, and I'm like, I don't know. Like, do I want it? I don't care, right? Like, if someone were to introduce either Canada or Greenland tomorrow and say, guess what? Greenland's the 51st state. I'm like, okay, and if they're saying, guess what? We tried really hard and we didn't get it. I'm like, okay, like it doesn't affect my life at all. But I think it would affect theirs. I think Greenland is like kind of like Denmark's like redheaded stepchild. Like they don't get all the rights and protections that Denmark normally has. And once again, we protect Denmark. We protect Greenland. Like they're basically already. This is the other question I had for you. Is like, do we even need any of these territories? Because we basically already have them. They don't pay taxes.
Denmark does one security thing that is important to NATO, and it's the strait, that Baltic Sea Strait, that keeps Russia in line.
Yeah,
and
right.
They really police that, and there's So Denmark's not completely freeloaded when it comes to security. They're providing security, but they're not. We're providing all the security to Denmark. And that was and Trump, right, being a disruptor, just wants to call it out and say, why should this continue this way forever? Why not change the status quo, especially or give people the option if they vote for it, if it's something that they want, maybe not this generation but next generation. He's open to the idea, and I think that's sort of, as long as it's done democratically and not through force,
right?
Allowing people to join a state and participate is not the same as conquering them, forced assimilation, and
right. And we are. It's like I said, we already have the ability to operate there. Like, it's not like if for some reason there's some kind of like strife between Russia and Europe, and we reach out to Denmark and say, listen, we're going to start putting some ships, in green, no one's going to stop us. They're going to just say, yes, please. It's not like, the only advantage we get out of this is like taxes, or natural resources. That's like those are the two big, but I don't know. I've not, here's the other thing too. I've always been, this is me, right? This is maybe where you and I diverge a little bit in ideology.
Sure.
I've always been a big, I'm not very interventionist. I'm relatively isolationist. I feel like most countries deserve self-determination. Anytime we get involved, even if it's better for them, which sometimes it is, right? Like, we've definitely toppled a lot of bad dictators, but we've also done this. America has this habit of doing this thing where we topple a bad dictator and then leave them flailing helpless for 20 years. Right. Mm-hmm. Instead of really helping rebuild, like how many times we did it in Afghanistan, we did it in Iraq, we did it, we do it over and over and over again.
It depends on if the population wants this. We don't like to stick around if there's insurgencies. Look, we rebuilt Japan, we rebuilt Europe because the population was a humble, defeated nation, right? And so we stuck around, and they came back to prosperity, better than before, right? And but when we tried to bless Afghanistan with American systems and things, they didn't want it. They were belligerent jerks, and it's sort of like the Romans never conquered the Scots because they didn't think the Scots deserved to have Roman civilization.
Right.
And it's like the America has offered it to these countries, and when they've rejected it, say, okay, we gave you a chance so you can see what you could be, well, we won't force that on you. But right. Germany and Japan and Italy too, who were all our enemies in the 20th century, when they submitted humbly and didn't become belligerent insurgents, were able to prosper and rejoin the world better than ever. And we didn't have to conquer them either. They were allowed to retain their autonomy. I mean, they're not allowed to be aggressive militarily, but they're allowed to, in every way, govern themselves and have self-determination, sovereignty.
Right. Yeah. One thing I want to mention. It seems like we've got a lot of people in our chat today from other nations, which is awesome. So welcome aboard, guys, and please like and subscribe. I mean, even if you hate everything we say, please like and subscribe so that you continue telling us how much you hate it in the future. But the great thing about this, one thing that I want to mention though is that
voluntary globalism. Is that what you'd say? Trump's we should call Trump's doctrine.
Right.
Kind of. We globalism as long as you join us.
Right. Of course, as long as it's all American globalism, right? Then it's no problem. But to be fair, right? America, I think, has the only government structure. Maybe like some of the others in Europe could handle it, but basically, I think America is the only government structure that could handle an entire world. Right, the way that we manage, because we can decentralize and let each person run themselves, and that's it. Like if you tried to implement Norway's vice grip on the entire world, that would die in seconds. It would literally die in seconds. You'd have maybe a week, and then it would be over. But that's not me trash talking Norway. It works great for them. which is why it would continue to work great for them under the supervision of America, right? Like, now, one thing that I'll say too is that with things like, oh, thank you, Tanya, thank you so much, and I've always, of course, you ask some of the best questions, so thank you so much. One of the things that I want to say too about, like, a lot of the comments in the chat are like, America needs to fix this, America needs to fix their education, need to fix da 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 da, and I agree with a lot of it. Right. Some of it is like, we definitely need an education overhaul. We need to fix everyone's got their yeah. Everyone's got stuff that they need, skeletons in their closet, stuff they need to fix. But that having been said, I also want to caution you against thinking that because some random index in some publication says that we do something poorly doesn't actually mean that we do something poorly, right? It's one of those things where, there's always trade-offs. Like, healthcare is a perfect example. I can go to a lot of different nations right now and get free healthcare, or I can go to America and get my complicated problem fixed very, very quickly and very, very competently, right? And so, but I'm gonna have to pay. I'm gonna have to pay for it. It's gonna come out of my nose. But meanwhile, there's gonna be trade-offs. So anyway, let's talk about the Panama Canal. Okay. This is the only one that I think Trump might have taken by force if it remained in Chinese control, right? Like, if those ports hadn't been bought up by I'm still not happy with BlackRock owning them, but I mean, it's one of those things where we never should have given it. This is, again, a situation like we had Cuba for a while, we gave it up. We had the Panama Canal for a while, we gave it up. We keep having, like, we have, how many times have we taken something in the Middle East and then give it back up? For people who
voted for Democrats.
Yeah. But for people who think that, like, we're just out to conquer the world, we do an awful lot of giving land back, right? Like, maybe at some point we should just keep it if that's really our goal. But I don't know if that's really.
I guess that's really, like, if a country came and said, all right, for 10 years you're U.S. territory, and then at that point, if you're unhappy, you can cut your losses and go back to being independent, or you can join and have full statehood. That's the type of trial period that you kind of offer people, right? You come for 10 years, become a U.S. We try to implement our U.S. institutions and help them draft a constitution that's in harmony with our constitution. If after 10 years they're miserable, they hate it, boom, they can go back to being their own state. Or at that point, then they can vote and move forward for statehood. And that's really, I think, to set forward a process where people, and the ones that would make the most sense to it, countries that are close to us and have struggled with corruption, right?
Yep.
And have struggled with governments that, like Haiti, right? With governments that have people become oligarchs who just try to have a few elites, while any type of infrastructure or well organized government just is not a priority at all. So something like that, but again, it would have to be freely chosen. Haiti has a lot of pride because of their history, that they want to self-govern themselves because of that, that historical paradigm that they have. But if when they're ready, so they'd have to choose, say, look, we're tired of corruption. We feel like this could be better for us. Let's try it for 10 years, 10-year trial period, see how it goes. And in 10 years, so it'll be a different presidency, and see if we're ready to move on.
So I want to address something that Weird Monkeyfish says. Monkeyfish says, how rich are you really if people don't have affordable healthcare, housing, many work several jobs and still barely can pay bills? So that's something I think, by the way, exists in every nation on earth. But I think that also, you're right. We definitely need to work on these things. We definitely need to work on our economy. And America, you may or may not know this, but America is just coming off 4 years of pretty rough economic management. Not that I would even go so far as to say it comes off of like 7 years, six years of rough economic management, because Trump was managing it well during the easy times and then had a tough time managing it during the hard times. But that's, and so then he overspent too. I'm hoping that we can rein that in and then, deflate our economy so that we don't have to worry about every price being outrageous. And it's starting. I'm starting to see like gas and things come down, which gas is enormous. Like people don't realize that if everything else goes up because of whatever tariffs or inflation or something, and gas goes down, then you basically have prices that stay the same. Like people don't realize that, but it's like your prices aren't going anywhere. If gas
Diesel is actually like for every like 2 cents the diesel goes down, when train shipping costs, and train companies save like $50 million a day or something. Like it's crazy. I think one thing when we talk about, we don't define our wealth by our poor citizens, right?
Yes.
But the standard of living in the U.S. has risen. That even people who live in projects, government projects, which is we would consider generally the lowest position, right? If you're on a government living in government housing, Section 8, but they would still have a refrigerator, indoor plumbing, indoor
Dishwasher.
electrical, dishwasher, windows that close with glass, that close seal, and an HVAC heating and air system. And these are the things like when Russia saw things that were luxuries for the elites were something that even the poorest people at least got a refrigerator. And somebody, what people from other countries want to come and say, well, yeah, but look how much different, how much wealthier, how much better standard of living this rich guy has, rather than how much we have elevated the standard of living of even the poorest or the lowest, the lower classes.
So Tanya says that we have many homeless people, and that's true. But I'm going to tell you something. 99. Well, I'm probably going overboard with that. It's a lot of the homeless people, like if not like 90%, like very very high percentage of them are homeless not because they can't have a home. They're homeless because they have some kind of like mental problem or something, or the drug addiction or something like that. Some problem, that medical problem that we need to address, definitely. But that's the problem. The problem isn't that they can't like find government housing, because government basically subsidizes it 100% for the people in that bracket, right? It's not like they can't find food. They can find it. They just don't understand how, or they don't. Somebody needs to guide them through the process. So we need more, in my opinion, we need more community centers that will help out, that will do outreach for stuff like this. That's the best way. Where did I hear that there's mental problems in the homeless community? I can promise.
Yeah,
I can promise that's the case. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, that isn't to say that there aren't some homeless people who are really like trying to make all ends meet, and they're just maybe uneducated about the way that they can get these things.
Yeah. So here are 2 stories I want to tell you, Tanya. Like my mother and father went to Japan in the 1980s. My father worked for a company that manufactured guitars in Japan. They had to tour their factory. And they came out. When they arrived late at night, they were taken to their hotel. They saw a bunch of homeless people across the street from this hotel sleeping in the park. They woke up in the morning, they come out of the hotel, all the homeless people were gone. And my mom asked the doorman, who spoke a little English, where are all the homeless people? And he looked at her like she was crazy. And she's like, they're working. They've gone to work. Right? Yep. So it was like they could work, but they couldn't afford homes, right? Now, in Southern California, where I grew up, there's a large homeless population. The town that I grew up in, Whittier, had a lot of soup kitchens. We had a lot of homeless outreach, things like that. The weather's very mild, where people can sleep out there. There are hills that are protected from development, permanent open spaces, things like that. It's not super dense housing. And they would try to, and these people, they would. LA Times has a lot about the mental illness, especially on Skid Row, of people. So one stat I saw recently, in 1960, the population of the United States was around 160 million, right? And there were 515,000 people in mental institutions. Today, our population is between 350 and 400 million, and there are 35,000 people in mental institutions. Right? So we used to have a culture in the 20th century that people that showed that they couldn't take care of themselves and would end up on the street, we would institutionalize them in asylums, right? That was seen as any manner a big push to drive down the number of asylums, and these people are now on the street. But essentially, they would define somebody who's incapable of taking care of themselves needs to be institutionalized.
Yeah.
People that cannot, and you have group homes for the mentally disabled and other things like that that people are in favor of it, but they would find street people who couldn't put it together and keep a home, and they would give them a home in an institution, but it was too close to jail, or there were too many bad stories of badly run asylums. But that's something that our population is twice the size, and we're institutionalizing a tenth of the people. We're finding them just out on the streets.
And this is kind of anecdotal, but like, I mean, I have friends that are homeless right now, and they every day they go down to, like, you know, the homeless shelter, the soup kitchens. They have a roof over their head, right? Like, and they say that there's plenty of space there too. So it's not like people can't find that roof over their head. They either just don't know how, or they have a problem that's like getting in the way of them knowing how. And that's why I feel like more community centers would be a good thing. I think that we could have a lot of outreach, and I think that we could address the medical problem in America a little bit better. And I think we could address a lot of things a little bit better. It actually is relatively cheap, believe it or not, to subsidize basically housing for everyone, but it would be at like a bare minimum level. These people wouldn't be happy with their housing, but they'd be, you know, they'd have, you know, Section 8 or something equivalent to it. But you could build a mass housing development for anyone that is homeless in America for relatively cheap. Same way as you could feed them for relatively cheap. But again, one of the things that people are probably misunderstanding is that in America, even though we can do all these things, every one of those things requires the participation of the rest of the body politic, right? It requires me to pay my money for somebody else who I don't know, for no other reason than that person can't handle their life for themselves. And that isn't to say that I wouldn't do it, because I do it. I do it all the time. I give to charity like you wouldn't believe, but I don't like being forced to do it. I don't like being in a situation where I'm required to give of myself. I like to choose to give of myself. That's just a personal philosophy.
So, I'd like to play. I just thought about this idea I'd heard years ago, and it's sort of off our topic of expansion, but we're sort of talking about the homeless or the lower classes or relative wealth. What if you thought there was a place in every major city, maybe the county seat of every county at least, where anyone, CEOs of companies, struggling families, anybody can go and they can get red beans, rice, milk, and cheese, right? Right? Red beans and rice. Anybody can get it. If you want more than that, if you want it different than that, and that's enough to sustain you. More than that, then you got to work for it, right? You want steak, you want other things, right? And that if you had an egalitarian system where everybody can qualify and get all the red beans and rice you want, and destigmatize it. I think part of the thing is there's stigmas attached to the poor, and we can, and people want to destigmatize that because it's seen like if you can work or if you're lucky or things like that. But ultimately, there's certain people, either intelligence wise or something that where they struggle to take care of themselves, and usually you'd have family or some loved one to help them with that. You know, if they end up, they don't have that, they fall through that. This is where before we would give them that, we would institutionalize them. Now they just like to spend on the street. That's something I think that we're going to need to come at again.
Yeah, I agree.
And but it's not, you know, it's still uncomfortable for people, but it is sort of a loss of their freedom to institutionalize somebody.
Yep. Yeah, and there's a lot going on here behind the scenes. Yeah, this is what when a lot of times when people say the words "Make America Great Again," I think this is really what they're talking about. They're talking about going back to that family unit, that focus and faith and stuff. But family units, you had a bunch of family units who, if you had a person who was down on their luck, who had an injury or had a mental issue or something like that, then that's when they would just go home. Their mother and father would take them back in, or their cousins or uncles or brother. Then all of a sudden you've got that structure where we take care of each other. And I think that's just something that's good for mankind, period. Right? Like in irrelevant of what government structure you're under. I think that's just something that all of us should be doing, is taking care of our family, taking care of our friends. But now it's gotten to a point where we're very, I don't know, standoffish in that way. It's kind of weird. And one of the things that one stat I saw the other day that I thought was interesting is that despite the stigma that the right is often kind of harsh when it comes to this sort of things, they don't care, but the right actually gives far more to charity than the left does. So it's not that the right isn't willing to give of themselves or to reach out. It's that they just don't want to be forced into it, right? They just don't want to be put in a place where they must.
Yeah, we want to be personal and charitable to individuals, the people that we encounter. We don't like throwing money into a pit or towards some nebulous problem.
Yep.
Let's just give money towards some foundation that's going to do something.
Like education.
Right? That feels like the leftists. They're like, the government should be in charge of this. Let's just give money and create a bureaucracy that'll take care of that. And then I don't have to worry about it. But we is rather than that, is those that we personally encounter in our lives, we should reach out and try to render assistance and charity to them, and it, on an individual basis. And it should be whether or not they, regardless of their political spectrum or identity. I mean, even if we would oppose them sort of politically, we feel like we can still be charitable to them as individuals in a one-on-one situation.
Right. So one thing too that I see, there's a lot of it's like a bash America day in chat, right? So, and that's fine. That America is not perfect. We never were, we never will be, right? But one thing that I'd encourage you to consider is that if you think back about the great empires in the universe, right? The Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the Mongolian Empire. It wasn't because they had free healthcare for everyone. That's not what made them great, right? The things that made them great is their economic power, their military might. That's what people think of when they think of greatness. Now, it's changed a lot in recent times. Nowadays, one of the things that we're tempted to do is think of a nation's greatness as its ability to equalize wealth. And that's a dangerous situation, a very, very dangerous situation. When you get to the point where you're thinking a country's only good if it takes money from this person to give it to this person who needs it, then that's very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. And that's exactly the country, no offense, that I don't want to live in. And that's why America is kind of hard to understand to everybody else who doesn't live here. We want the freedom and then to choose to give. And I keep going back to the same thing, but
it's part of our culture, right? Thou shalt not covet. We don't resent the rich if they earned it themselves, right? We can be a little bit for inherited or long term, sort of people who are old school generational wealth a little bit. There's a little culture against that, but we don't begrudge self-made people, right? Who were middle class and now are successful. For the wealth, and we don't covet that. I got no right to Bill Gates or Elon Musk to give me any money unless I can provide value for that, right?
Right.
I have no right to his money. I don't covet his money. I mean, it'd be great. He could. My house is for sale, please. Elon Musk come buy my house, but that would be I would be giving him value. In no way should I have any right that his money should come to me for no other reason than he has it and I don't. That's not a good explanation. So or to say my life would be better with your money, so vis-a-vis I deserve it, right? That's not American. That type of covetousness leads to a destructive. If the majority can vote to take money away from the rich, we have no protections. And that's why we're a republic and not a democracy. A democracy is to protect property, that we have a rule of law. And so we don't resent that. That's very different from socialist countries that have had decades of propaganda that any type of ownership is theft and any type of property or controlled by anybody is evil.
Now, I do want to ask you, though, Christian. So this is a little pushback to this situation is, what do you think about those who claim that the way that Trump's rhetoric works and the way that he's like doing his tariffs, which, you know, for better or worse, it is an additional like pressure against other nations, right? Whether they deserve it or not. Like, I mean, obviously most of these nations have been tariffing the life out of us for 50 years, but never mind all that. The point is, it is new pressure, right? It is new pressure. And, you know, Trump says these things like, I'm just going to, you know, make Canada the 51st state when Canada doesn't really have much interest in it. A lot of people say that pressure, that like kind of like Trump interaction is, you know, kind of like banter, his rhetoric actually pushed Canada into like, they were probably going to elect that dude Poilievre or whatever. And then it actually like shifted the politics because of this like anti-Trump resentment. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, like so it's another Labor prime minister was elected, and he's raising taxes, and Canada's going to get what they voted for, right? Yep. They voted short-sightedly, right? This was a spite vote. But Trump, right? Remember that comment wasn't made in a vacuum, right? Pierre Trudeau came to Trump, and Trump said, hey, you're exploiting us. Why can't we just have fair? Why are you to send everything here without any tariffs? But if we send stuff to you, you're blocking it. Like that's crazy. You're not treating us like why can't you just drop that? And Trudeau said, if we drop all that, we won't exist as a country. Right? That was what the prime minister said, that the tariffs, their unequal trade with the U.S. was so important that they would cease to exist as a country. That was so fragile. And Trump was sort of glib. It's like, you're not that fragile. And he's like, if you're not fragile, then just become part of the United States.
Right.
He was calling him out. He was calling Trudeau on his BS. Right. And because he knew that wasn't really an answer, and he's still calling him out. Like, you're saying you get to treat the U.S. unfairly because we're so strong that you can exploit us, right? And that your government, your economy is so weak it will collapse if you have fair trade with the U.S. I don't buy that for a second, right? Because if that's the case, then you would gladly join the United States.
Right.
So, you know, I see it as more when I see it in that context, I don't think that he's really he's not backing away from it. He's not cowed after Canada's I don't want to butcher the pronunciation of his last name, Carney.
Yeah, Carney.
Right. Had a big show of him flipping the middle finger to Donald Trump, right? And Trump brings him down, still meets with him, right? Gives him a chance to still shows him some respect. And repeats the thing to his face. Are you sure you guys don't want to explore joining our territory? It would be good for you. It would be good for everybody. Right? And we'd still give you, sovereignty of your own statehood. Right? You call your statehood Canada. You'll still exist.
Right.
And let him know that that's still an option. And he's like, no, we're not for sale. Right?
Yeah. I mean, he's just being belligerent.
Are you willing to trade with us? Are you willing to trade with us fairly? And let's see through the BS. Let's see through the spin. This is a lot of propaganda. The elites want you to see that it's bellicose rhetoric that Trump did, but he's calling them on their BS.
Yeah, and actually, I think what is his name? Gordon from Canada. anyway, he said that they actually would maybe think about like dropping their tariffs on us and equalizing some things. I'm like, well, you guys should have led with that. Like, it's late in the game now, but I mean, okay, fine, right? That's progress. I'm happy, but yeah, I mean, meanwhile, I'm proud that Trump even though Carney, flipped him off and still was trying to be belligerent in the meeting. I'm glad that Trump was like, somebody asked him, is like, well, are you going to drop your tariffs? He's like, no. Because we don't want their steel, we don't want their aluminum, we don't want their car. We want to make that stuff here. That's I'm not going to be cowed by this nonsense. And so I don't want to push people away, but I also want things to be fair. And I'm glad that somebody's finally standing up for that. And
well, yeah, and we've got to have some disruption. So he's saying like, let's have a year of disruption. Let's see how bad it is, and then we can make some changes. Right, and then
right.
if it's that bad, if we can accommodate, let's put these tariffs in place and give them time for people to adjust and industry to rise up, investment to adjust to that. And if it's so bad next year, we can make some changes. These aren't permanent. Even laws, even we make laws, doesn't mean they can't be changed. But it's worth exploring. When other nations have started a trade war, we just haven't responded. So
right. Well, anyway, listen, guys, that's all I had for you today. Guys, everybody, please hit like, please hit subscribe. It's been kind of a rough week for me medically, so I'm gonna have to call it at this point. But yeah, check us out. We do this every Wednesday, every Saturday, and we love guys. We love it when you come on the chat and you disagree with it. That's great. That's fuel for the fire. It's like a good conversation. That's one of the reasons I started this channel in the first place, is to like open that dialogue up. But I do caution you against some of the things that you've heard about America. Like, don't believe everything you hear. Maybe hear it from an American straight, and like you may get a different answer, right? You may get a yeah. So, but anyway, it was great to see you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time on Common Mansplaining.
Yeah. My last point is people might object to America, but they still want to live here. They still
right.
And the common men throughout the world recognize, whether they'll say it or admit it or not, recognize the value of true liberty in America.
Amen to that.